Have you ever wondered why the very people who seem most put together emotionally are often the ones who leave behind a trail of confused, heartbroken partners? There's something deeply paradoxical about how avoidant love became heartbreak for countless people navigating modern relationships. The individuals who appear most independent, most self-sufficient, most admirably detached, often possess a particular way of loving that can leave others feeling utterly bewildered and emotionally devastated. Understanding this phenomenon requires looking beyond surface behaviors into the intricate psychology of human attachment. When someone has learned to protect themselves by maintaining emotional distance, their version of love becomes a carefully orchestrated dance of approach and retreat. They might be incredibly charming during the pursuit phase, showing all the right signs of interest and connection. Yet something shifts once deeper intimacy becomes expected or demanded. What appears to be rejection or indifference is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism, honed through years of learning that emotional vulnerability leads to disappointment or pain. This pattern affects millions of relationships, creating a cycle where the more someone pursues closeness, the more the avoidant partner pulls away. The tragedy lies not in malicious intent, but in two people speaking entirely different emotional languages. One person interprets withdrawal as rejection, while the other experiences pursuit as suffocation. Neither understands that they're both acting from their deepest fears about love and connection. The cognitive bias, known as fundamental attribution error, plays a crucial role here, where people assume behavior reflects character rather than circumstance or learned patterns. If you want to better understand someone's attachment style, see the link in the description to one of the most popular books on attachment theory. Consider the story of a brilliant woman who worked in corporate finance, someone who could navigate complex business negotiations with remarkable skill, yet found herself completely lost when it came to lasting romantic connections. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to attract partners initially, displaying wit, intelligence, and just enough vulnerability to seem intriguing rather than needy. Every relationship followed the same pattern. The first 3 months would be intoxicating, filled with deep conversations lasting until dawn, spontaneous weekend getaways, and the kind of connection that made both parties believe they had found something extraordinary. Her partners would begin making future plans, talking about meeting families, discussing moving in together. That's when everything would change. She would begin finding fault with small things. The way her partner chewed food would suddenly become irritating. Their enthusiasm about shared activities would start feeling overwhelming rather than endearing. Most telling of all, she would begin creating scenarios in her mind where the relationship was doomed to fail anyway. Her partner would eventually leave, she reasoned, so why not protect herself by maintaining some emotional distance? The partners, meanwhile, would sense this shift without understanding its source. They would try harder, plan more romantic gestures, attempt deeper conversations about feelings and future plans. Each effort would push her further away, confirming her unconscious belief that people who love you will eventually become demanding and suffocating. The relationships would end with her partners feeling confused and rejected, while she felt relieved yet somehow empty. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn that reveals everything about how avoidant patterns actually develop. This woman's approach to love wasn't learned in romantic relationships at all. Growing up, she had parents who were emotionally inconsistent. Sometimes they would be warm and attentive, other times completely absorbed in their own problems and unavailable. She learned that depending on others for emotional support was unreliable and potentially painful. The safest strategy became self-reliance, maintaining enough distance to avoid disappointment while still enjoying connection on her own terms. Understanding this pattern is the first step toward breaking free from cycles that leave everyone involved feeling confused and hurt. The most important thing to recognize is that avoidant behavior in relationships isn't personal rejection, even though it feels exactly like that to the person experiencing it. Someone with avoidant attachment has learned that emotional safety comes from maintaining control over how close others can get. When dealing with an avoidant partner, the natural instinct is to pursue harder when they pull away. This creates what psychologists call the anxious-avoidant trap, where one person's efforts to connect trigger the other person's need to retreat. Breaking this cycle requires doing something that feels completely counterintuitive. Instead of pursuing when they withdraw, create space. Instead of demanding emotional conversations, model emotional availability without expectations. Think of how Serena van der Woodsen from Gossip Girl often created more attraction by being less available rather than more clingy. The confirmation bias plays a significant role in perpetuating these patterns. Avoidant individuals unconsciously look for evidence that their partner will eventually become too demanding or disappointing, while their partners look for evidence of rejection. Both usually find exactly what they're looking for, even when other interpretations might be more accurate. For those who recognize avoidant patterns in themselves, the path forward involves gradually building tolerance for vulnerability and interdependence. This doesn't mean forcing yourself into uncomfortable situations, but rather slowly expanding your comfort zone around emotional intimacy. Start with small acts of vulnerability, like sharing minor disappointments or asking for simple forms of support. Notice the urge to withdraw when partners show enthusiasm or make future plans, and instead of acting on that urge immediately, pause and examine what's driving it. One of the most effective strategies involves developing what therapists call earned security. This means consciously learning new ways of connecting that feel safer than old patterns. For someone who learned that emotional distance equals safety, this might mean setting clear boundaries around intimacy while gradually expanding those boundaries as trust develops. Like Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You, avoidant individuals often have rich inner emotional lives, but struggle to share that depth with others in healthy ways. The key insight is that avoidant attachment isn't about not wanting connection, but about wanting connection that feels safe and sustainable. This requires partners who can demonstrate consistency without being overwhelming, and who can respect the need for emotional space without interpreting it as rejection. Think of how Emily Cooper from Emily in Paris maintains her independence while still forming meaningful connections, though she sometimes struggles with deeper intimacy. Recognition is powerful, but change requires practice and patience with yourself and others. Avoidant attachment develops over years, so transforming these patterns takes time and conscious effort. The goal isn't to become someone who never needs space or independence, but to find ways of loving that don't require constant emotional distance as protection. The beautiful irony is that people with avoidant attachment often have tremendous capacity for deep, meaningful connection once they learn to trust that vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to disappointment or loss of self. Their natural independence can actually become a strength in relationships when it's balanced with emotional availability rather than used as a shield against intimacy. Breaking free from patterns where avoidant love becomes heartbreak starts with understanding that everyone's attachment style developed as a reasonable response to their early experiences. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with needing space and independence in relationships. The problem arises when those needs prevent the deeper connections that make relationships truly fulfilling for everyone involved. Change is possible, but it requires acknowledging that the strategies that once provided protection might now be limiting the very connections you actually desire most.
Thank you for watching. If you want to learn how to better understand avoidance, relationships, and psychological biases, then subscribe to our channel. because you deserve beautiful relationships.